my name is Alexis Washa. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to sit on my thesis committee. Today I'm going to be presenting on the efficacy of and preference for choice in token economies during response acquisition. I'm going to start off by giving a brief overview. Children with autism encounter a lot of non-preferred activities throughout their day, whether that's playing functionally with a toy rather than stimming or sitting at table during instructional programming. Motivation is a huge factor. Things can come into play, such as learning histories, prevailing contingencies, and cultural context, as cited in Elliott and Dillenberger of 2014. Michael of 1993 stated that events that alter the reinforcing value and thus change an organism's behavior is termed motivating operations. Again, motivation is such a necessary component in order to increase academic responding in children with autism. One way to increase responding is the type of reinforcement contingencies that are put into place. There are several different types of reinforcement. Some of the most common ones used with children with autism are conditioned reinforcers. They gain their value through multiple pairings with other reinforcers. Another form is generalized conditioned reinforcers, which also gain their value through multiple pairings with other backup reinforcers. A prime example of this would be token economies. A token is an object or a symbol that can be exchanged for goods or services, as cited by Hackenberg in 2009. Carnett et al. 2014 also found that token economies establish behavior, they maintain behavior, and they also decrease behavior. Children with autism need to be on such dense schedules of reinforcement in order to achieve academic responding. Sometimes it may not be feasible to provide reinforcement contingent on each correct response, so therefore a token economy would be beneficial. Upon the child earning all of their designated amount of tokens, they're able to exchange those tokens for an item or reinforcement of their choice. And Elliott and Dillenberger of 2014 cited that they found choice in itself was reinforcing for some individuals. The next thing I'm going to cover are preference assessments. Practitioners use preference assessments on a daily basis in order to determine effective reinforcers. They identify putative reinforcers, however they're typically effective for most children. There are two types, indirect, indirect. Indirect are typically interviews or checklists in order to identify reinforcers through either interviews with parents or caregivers or clinical supervisors. Direct assessments include single stimulus, paired stimulus, multiple stimulus without replacement, and free operant. We just need to keep in mind of the type of population that we're working with and note the advantages and limitations of each assessment method when you're working with certain populations and determining which one is going to be the best method. The next thing I want to cover is choice. Choice is defined as an allocation of responding among concurrently available response options, as cited in Ackerland et al. Of 2015. Several studies have evaluated choice, and I'm going to cover a few of them. Toussaint, Kodak, and Vladescu of 2016 found that providing students with choice-making opportunities was beneficial during instructional programming, and the opportunity to choose increased academic responding. Lerman and Iwata of 1997 evaluated individuals on whether they prefer conditions where they can choose, and results showed that kids with autism engaged in more on-task behavior and less maladaptive behavior as a result of being able to choose. The next article I'm going to cover is Tiger, Toussaint, Roth in 2010. They evaluated the effects of choice and no-choice reinforcement conditions on task responding in three children diagnosed with autism. The results showed that 2 out of the 3 participants engaged in higher rates of task completion during choice when compared in a progressive ratio format, and the results also supported the fact that choice may enhance the efficacy of some reinforcement-based interventions. Next, I'm going to discuss Dyer, Dunlap, and Winterling, 1990. They evaluated 3 individuals with developmental disabilities where they could choose from various classroom tasks and/or reinforcers. They also compared them to when teachers chose the task or the reinforcers, and they found that problem behavior occurred less frequently when the students were able to choose versus when the teacher chose for them. Gekeler, Libby, Graff, and Ahern, 2000, evaluated choice versus no choice on response rates with 3 children diagnosed with autism, and they were compared across single operant and concurrent chain procedures. The results found that during the single operant phase, no difference was shown between the choice and the no choice condition. However, during the concurrent schedule phase, all participants had greater rates of responding that led them to choice. Saran and Barrera of 2010 evaluated whether the opportunity to choose backup reinforcement in a token system would influence response rates with academic tasks, and children's preference for choice when they are able to choose versus when they're not able to choose. And those results showed that the preference to choose varied among participants. So as you can see, a lot of these studies evaluate choice, whether it's in the context of problem behavior, on-task behavior, or response rates. But few of these studies fail to examine how choice affects response acquisition. Elliott and Dillenberger of 2014 evaluated choice on motivation during discrete trial instruction and conducted a preference assessment and concluded that preference assessments may be necessary in order to identify effective reinforcers. However, choice may have improved motivation for some individuals. The overall purpose of my study is to evaluate whether providing choice as reinforcement as a backup reinforcer in a token economy will produce accurate responding and as well as better motivation compared to limiting the reinforcer to only a single item that's identified during the preference assessment. We also wanted to evaluate preference in a concurrent chain arrangement in order to identify participants prefer to work under conditions where they get to choose versus when they do not get to choose. Next, I'm going to talk about the methods. I used 3 participants. They were 3 boys diagnosed with autism. They were between the ages of 5 and 7. They were vocal learners, had a history with token reinforcement, and attended the center full-time. Alongside ABA therapy, they also received occupational therapy and speech therapy. The materials used for this study were 3 token boards. One was blue, indicating high preferred condition. One was orange, indicating the free choice condition. And the other one was white, indicating the control condition. They each had 5 squares on them and were placed in plastic cover protectors, and a whiteboard marker was used to give them tokens. We also used discrete trial instruction cards. They were a standard 3x5 card with receptive identification targets on them. We also used a video camera in order to record sessions for IOA purposes. And a simple table and chair method was used to conduct our table sessions. My dependent variables of the study were the total number of correct responses and the cumulative total of mastered targets. A correct response was considered correct if the participant responded within 3 to 5 seconds of the discriminative stimuli, find the specific stimulus. If the participant did not respond correctly for 10 consecutive trials, that condition was terminated and the researcher moved on to the next condition. The target was then considered mastered if the participant responded correctly 5 consecutive trials in a row in the same condition on the same day. An acquisition target was considered acquisition by running baseline probe data. There were 3 trials, and the participant was considered to have it as an acquisition target if they responded incorrectly across 3 trials, or if they responded correctly once and incorrectly twice, as long as the 3rd trial was not correct. The design that was used was an A-B design with an embedded multi-element design. Like I said, baseline will not be included in these graphs due to being probe data. Inter-observer agreement was conducted for at least 30% of our sessions, and our agreement was 100% across all conditions and all participants. Next, I'm going to cover the procedures. Prior to conducting this study, I needed to gain a consent from the parents. I sent home a parent letter specifying what my project entailed, and them signing that letter agreed that they would conduct the informed consent process. I met with the parents and went over all the procedures, the risks, the benefits, etc. Upon them signing the informed consent, I was able to move forward with my study. Also, prior to each session with the child, I conducted ASCENT and laid out what the session was going to look like and gave them the option to accept or decline. However, throughout the whole course of my study, none of the participants declined to work with me once. The next things that were conducted were the preference assessments. We did 2 different types. The first one was an MSWO, in order to determine the highly preferred item that was used during the high preferred condition. I did this by presenting 5 items that were identified by interviews with the caretaker and the clinical supervisor on what the child most preferred. I presented the 5 items in a straight array and gave the child the instruction to select one. Upon the selection, the child could engage in that item for 30 seconds. That item was not placed back into the array, and this was done until all items were selected. We also conducted a paired stimulus preference assessment. This was done to rule out color as an extraneous variable. I wanted the participants to pick to work under the free choice solely because they wanted to, not because that color was associated with their favorite color. I presented 2 token boards at a time simultaneously and gave the instruction to pick one until I ran all conditions twice. The type of teaching procedure that was used was discrete trial instruction of receptive identification. As you know, DTI is a primary teaching procedure that we use when teaching children with autism in order to individualize and simplify the steps. Next, I'm going to go over my conditions. Like I said, baseline was probe data. If they received all incorrect responses, it was an acquisition target. If they received 1 correct response and 2 incorrect responses, it was also considered acquisition as long as the third trial was not correct. I used a random number generator in order to present my conditions. During the high preferred condition, a blue token board was used to signal that during that condition they were only able to work for the high preferred item. I presented 3 cards in a straight array in front of the participant. 1 was the target I was teaching to, and the other 2 were distractor stimuli. I would give the instruction to find the specific stimulus. Contingent on the correct response, they would receive vocal praise and a token in the form of a dash mark on their token board. Contingent on an incorrect response, no reinforcement was provided, and I moved on to the next trial. During the free choice and the control condition, the procedures were also similar. However, during the free choice condition, an orange token board was used to signal the availability that they were able to choose among the 5 reinforcers that I presented during the MSWO. During the control condition, the procedures were also the same. However, they could earn tokens, but they were not able to exchange them for reinforcement. Across all these 3 conditions, I did intersperse acquisition and mastered targets on a 1-to-1 ratio just to build that behavioral momentum and to make them successful at some points during the session. But only vocal praise was provided on those mastered targets. During the concurrent chain phase, I wanted to assess if they had a preference on whether or not which condition they preferred to work under. I presented all 3 token boards and stated the contingency of each token board. Then I gave the student the instruction to pick one. Upon the selection, that is the condition that I would run for that session. Now I'm going to move on to results. I'm going to start with Alex. Again, I use pseudonyms to cover identity. On the x-axis displays trial blocks, and on the y-axis is the number of correct responses. So this graph depicts the total number of correct responses displayed by Alex. There was a lot of variability in his responding in the acquisition phase. And just to note as well, the circles depict the control condition, the triangles depict the control condition, the circles depict the high preferred condition, and the open squares predict the free choice condition. There was a lot of variability in Alex's responding in the beginning up until around trial 22. Observers noticed that the free choice condition and the high preferred condition appeared to be functionally equivalent, meaning that during the high preferred condition, iPad was identified during the preference assessment and was used consistently. However, when Alex was able to choose during the free choice condition, he also chose the iPad each time. Moving on to the concurrent chain phase, he did display some variability in the very beginning as well. However, it did stable out, and out of 15 trials total, he chose to work under free choice 7 times, thus demonstrating that he preferred to work under the condition in which he gets to work for, his choice. This next graph depicts the cumulative total of mastered targets. Again, on the x-axis, there's trial blocks, and on the y-axis displays the cumulative number of mastered targets. As well, the triangles depict the control condition, circles are the high preferred, and the open squares are the free choice. During the cumulative total, he mastered a total of 11 targets during the free choice condition and 10 during the high preferred and the control condition. Now I'm going to move on to the results for Matt. The same rules apply. On the x-axis, trial blocks are depicted, and on the y-axis, the number of correct responses are depicted on the side. On trial 14, researchers introduced different distractor stimuli due to Matt inconsistently responding to the target that resembled the American flag. So researchers took out those flags and replaced them with new flags that did not resemble the American flag and hoped to promote skill acquisition. On trial 49, researchers obtained an attending response. We noticed that Matt was consistently responding, however, he was failing to scan his array before making a selection. And we also hoped that that would promote his skill acquisition targets as well. On trial 58, researchers swapped targets altogether. We had made observations and realized that the obtained attending response wasn't promoting skill acquisition like we hoped, so we swapped targets across all 3 conditions to make it consistent. During the concurrent chain phase, Matt did choose to work under the free choice condition 6 out of 9 times, thus demonstrating that he preferred to work under the condition in which he gets to choose. This graph depicts the cumulative total of mastered targets, again trial blocks on the x-axis and cumulative total numbers of correct targets on the y-axis. During the cumulative total of mastered targets, he mastered a total of 8 targets in free choice, 4 during the high preferred, and 0 in the control condition, thus demonstrating that we had experimental control with Matt. Next, I'm going to display the graphs for Keith. This is the total number of master targets. Between trial 21 and 22, researchers ran master targets only. There was a lot of variability in his data in the beginning, and he was responding, but he was consistently responding incorrectly. So we did like what we did with Matt, where we present the 3 stimuli, we have him look at each card individually before we give him the instruction to find the specific stimuli, in hopes to promote skill acquisition. On trial 25, on trial 44, his responding did increase, however there was no differentiation among conditions, thus demonstrating that our reinforcement was not differentially effective for him. During the concurrent chain phase, he did choose to work under the free choice condition 4 out of 6 times, thus demonstrating that he had more motivation to work under the condition where he gets to choose. This graph depicts the cumulative total of master targets for Keith. During the free choice condition, he mastered 12 targets. During the high preferred, he mastered 8. And during control, he mastered 7. All right, move on to the discussion part of this. The results did not show a clear difference between total number of correct responses for Alex and Keith. However, they did for Matt. Matt demonstrated control by simply only responding during the free choice and the high preferred condition, and limited responding during the control. However, we had limited control with Alex and Keith. Alex mastered targets consistently across all 3 conditions. However, Keith and Matt mastered additional targets and more targets during the free choice condition. So the results of these acquisition trials showed a potential difference in the efficacy of reinforcement when choice was compared to no choice and control for Matt. The results are consistent with the literature with Elliott and Dillenberger 2014, and that choice in itself may be reinforcing for some. However, we failed to show that with the other 2 participants, but we did show this with Matt. However, there was a clear preference to work under the free choice condition when we presented the concurrent chain arrangement across all 3 participants. They all chose to work under the free choice condition consistently. The results are also consistent with Toussaint, Kodak, and Vladiscule 2016, and that during instructional programming, it may be beneficial to provide choice in order to increase academic responding, in which this case we showed that with Matt. Providing choice was equally effective as delivering a high preferred item. Conducting preference assessments may not always be necessary in order to achieve comparable acquisition results. However, may not always be effective. It's always recommended to provide choice within daily programming with children with autism. I just want to note a few limitations that this study did present. We had an open economy. The reinforcers were accessible outside of the study during their day and at home. As a result, satiation effects may have been more likely. Another limitation was that some conditions were functionally equivalent, meaning that during the high preferred condition, when they only received 1 item as identified during the preference assessment, many of the participants also chose that item consistently during the free choice condition, and the other remaining backup reinforcers remained untouched. A third limitation is the type of demand characteristics. All 3 participants have a strong history of compliance at working at table. Alex also has an extra experimental history of compliance because his parents run targets at home with minimal reinforcement. The tokens may have been reinforcing in themselves as well as my vocal praise. Some students are socially mediated, and my vocal praise and the tokens alone could have been reinforcing enough. The next limitation is the difficulty of targets. We started this study with Alex, and he had an advanced repertoire of receptive identification targets. Those same targets were then used across all 3 participants, and that could have hindered the results depending on the difficulty for each participant. 2 out of the 3 participants were in fact able to tag each condition they were working under. When I presented the token boards, they were able to tell me what they were getting out of that token board. Error correction was not provided simply due to the potential aversive effects of my prompts, and a lot of these kids have a strong history of reinforcement and getting the correct response based on error correction and may become reliant on it, and that may have hindered our results as far as skill acquisition as well. Although our study posed several limitations, some of them can lead into future research. Future research may look at modifying these procedures in order to produce better experimental control. Another area for future research is having a closed economy. restricting those reinforcers solely for the purpose of the study, so they're not able to access them outside of the study, and thus more likely that they won't be satiated on those items and will be more motivated for them in the future. Another area for future research could be types of preference assessments. The ones that we discussed earlier, they all may yield different results, and we need to keep in mind the type of population that we're working with and that they may produce different results for especially the high preferred condition stimulus. Overall, in conclusion, our results were consistent with the literature, and that the opportunity to choose is often more preferred than the absence of choice. As well as the preference to choose the backup reinforcer in a token system, it varied across participants, which in this case that's consistent with Saran and Barrera of 2010. It also shows how individuals with autism and developmental disabilities are capable of making choices within their daily context, and practitioners need to keep this in mind when moving forward in order to incorporate choice into more of their daily programming. Here are the references that I cited for the presentation. I want to thank you all for taking the time to sit and listen to my presentation. Let me know if you guys have any additional questions. Thank you.